Well, I'd like to welcome you to the Legends of High-End Audio panel. These are living legends and still productive and doing great work. I wanted to make an announcement. Paul McGowan was supposed to be on the panel, but he got stuck in Denver. He snowed in, no flights in or out on United at least, and so he wanted to apologize to all of you who came to see him, and we'll have to make it up some other time. But he sends his regrets and really wanted to be here. Let me introduce the people on the panel. To my right, we have Frank Van Alstyne, and he is the founder of Audio by Van Alstyne. I think one thing that, as I stepped back, I thought, I can almost trace my audio history and my interest in audio by the contributions that each of these gentlemen have made. Like some of you, I've bought several of their products, or I have lusted after them. So it's a real honor for me to be on stage with each of these people. So Frank Van Alstyne started as Jensen's Stereo Shop, and he can tell you more about that, but he came to my attention for the double Dyna 400s that we reviewed in the Absolute Sound. And he had mods to other Dynaco equipment and at least one audio research product, the SP3, I don't know about the 3A, but the 3. And he moved on to his own line of electronics, the Transcendence Electronics, and he's continuing to be productive. And we just reviewed a wonderful little phono stage from him. I think it was $5.99, $4.99, sorry. It's the Vision Phono Preamp. So he'll tell you more in a minute. To his right is Kevin Hayes, who founded, along with his parents, the Valve Amplification Company. Yeah, that's why we say VAC. All right, so he founded the VAC Electronics Company. I still own one of his first products, the PA45 mono amps, but he also had the PA90s, the Renaissance series, and more recently the Statement series with continuous auto bias. So he's very productive, and we're glad to have him with us. To his right is Dan D'Agostino, and he not only started one high-end audio company, he started two. And that's Krell Industries, and Dan D'Agostino Master Audio Systems. And I don't know about you, but when his KSA 100s came out, I really lusted after those. Those were Class A amplifiers that sounded great and had a lot more power than the previous Class A amps. But he's moved on to the Momentum series. After a series of other products, he's moved on to the Momentum series under his own brand, and they're not only gorgeous looking, they're gorgeous sounding, so I would encourage you to all listen to those. And lastly, we have, but not least, we have Dave Wilson, founder of Wilson Audio. He first came to my attention when he was writing in the Absolute Sound, and he also produced some of the best recordings I'd ever heard. And I really value those in my collection today. So, of course, he moved on to found Wilson Audio, and I own the Watt 1s and Watt 2s, and really enjoyed those, and heard the Alex's today, much bigger scale, and those are brilliant. So again, we're very pleased to have each and every one of these people on our panel. So I'm going to start with Frank Van Alstyne, and I'll ask this question of each of the participants. What were you doing when you were on the verge of starting your company, and what made you think you could create audio products that people would buy? So how's that for an opening question?
That's a good question, because nobody's ever asked me that, so it's...
Can you hear him all right?
Is that on? It's down? Is it there?
Probably a lot closer is the answer.
Okay.
How are we doing on sound for Frank? Can you say a few words?
Actually, it was
Good.
late college, in which, because I had a knack for building audio amplifiers, and by that time I had read the Allied catalog page for page totally and had it memorized. And I had college kids that I knew when I was there that were asking for my advice on getting audio components, and this would have been back in the late 1950s. And I actually ended up with a deal with a little local audio company called Kent Craft Hi-Fi in the Twin Cities, and they were giving me a finder's fee. And then when I went to work as a project engineer at the state of Minnesota, in electrical stuff, I helped relocate and redesign power lines. I met another guy there that was Paul Jensen, that was doing the same thing, finder's fee, working with people, another audiophile nut, and we kind of met trying to sell each other our services. And we joined forces and got a Dynakit franchise and some other things. And Dynaco at that time was highly popular, but totally unprofitable to deal with, because it was Dynaco would give anybody in the world a franchise, including us. And they were being discounted very widely, and that was their downfall. So people were selling for $5 over cost. And what we did is we came up with a new marketing plan and business plan, and that is we offered, you paid us list price for a Dynaco unit, and we built it for you for free. And so we made the full 33% profit on them, and we both got really, really, really good at building Dynakits really fast, really good, and it grew like toppies from there. We each invested $300, and between Paul Jensen and I, that $300 each that we invested is my sum total capital investment into my audio business. And the rest of it put a couple of kids through college and everything else we ever wanted to do for our life. But that's the way we started and then from building Dynaco kits, we saw so many of them, we saw that they were different internally. That Dynaco's internal, if you were bought a kit and did it yourself, you saw one. But because we were building them by the scores, we saw production from hundreds of different ones, and we found they weren't all the same. And some of them sounded better than others. And so we decided, you know what, let's make them all sound like the best ones. And so we could tweak the circuits so we could get the work the way the Dynaco's best ones did. And we did that for quite a while. And then visited Dynaco. Wade Burns gave me the schematic for his double output circuit for the Dyna 400, and they had never built it, so we did. And then we also upgraded the driver boards for it and added the huge external power supply, called it the double Dyna 400, sent it to the Absolute Sound. Every person loved it. That put us on the map. We got bigger, and by that time I realized we still weren't going to go anywhere without a really, really good electrical engineer on the staff, and we ended up with a young genius electrical engineer who took us from dealing with Dynaco into our own circuit designs from ground up, which we put in Dyna chassis for a while after they went out of business, because we could get by their empty chassis cheap from a company called Sound Values. Sound Values. And we saw that that was going to go away. We tooled our own sheet metal and never looked back.
Great. Kevin,
Well,
what were you doing when you were on the verge of starting your audio company, and what made you think that you could create products that people would buy?
well, at the time I was in the final phases of a PhD in operations research at Duke University. And I'd been there for almost 4 years, first for a master's in business and then for the doctorate. And I would discovered that some of the engineering and physics libraries had open stacks going back to about 1910. I would spend weekends mining the old periodicals for information about amplifiers, vacuum tubes, how recordings are made, all the basic things that form the building blocks of this craft. And during that period of time began working on an amplifier for myself. Like I think all of us, I wanted to get deeper into the music, to peel back more layers, to have it more alive, more breath of life. And so, what the heck, try building one yourself. And toward the end of the second year of the doctoral program, we had an amplifier running. And I thought it was really pretty good. And I had a friend who was a dealer in Durham, North Carolina, and invited him over one night to take a listen to it. And it was the first time I ever actually saw someone's jaw drop slowly open. He sat there, and for about 40 seconds, his mouth just got more and more slack. And he turned to me and said, "You made this?" Okay, good confirmation we're on the right track. And then I booked an airline ticket to the summer CES in Chicago in 1990 to see what the industry looked like. Thought we might be able to make a go of it, and I love music. I love trying to bring it back to life. When you find something you love, you should try to make a living out of it, and that's exactly what happened.
And you started out, it was kind of a family affair, wasn't it?
Well, the entire project to build that first amplifier, which became the PA45 that you mentioned, was something I undertook in collaboration with my dad, who had been trained, he was a radar instructor in World War II, and took his BSW afterwards on the GI Bill and wound up doing engineering for companies like Bendix and Thiokol, designed the range tracking system for the first Sparrow missile using pencil vacuum tubes. And he was not an audiophile, but he was always very supportive of anything I wanted to do. He was a wonderful man, and a man that could do virtually anything. He was a Renaissance man, and so he helped design the first circuits and fabricate the first amplifier, and then I took over on the tweaking and voicing side, and it, to this day, is one of my most cherished memories to have been able to work with him for something on the 20 years.
And there was a particular event like 3 or 4 years after you introduced the PA45 and the PA90 that kind of put VAC even more on the map. What was that?
Well, are you referring to the Renaissance amplifiers? And Mr. Pearson again, and his very kind praise of those?
Well, I was actually thinking of a deal that you struck.
Toward the early part of 1995, I got an idea that it would be interesting to try to license the Marantz name and do a modernized version of the Model 7 preamplifier and Model 9 monoblocks. So at one of the summer shows, I approached some of the gentlemen from Marantz, Japan with the idea, and they said, let us think about this. And another show about a month or two later, they came back to me and said, we like the idea, but tell you what, rather than making a modernized version, let's make an exact replica, and rather than you selling it, let us sell it for you. And so we entered into a contract to build, I think in the end it was 6,000 pieces from Marantz, Japan, of the 7s, 8Bs, and 9s. And they were very exacting recreations. We had the original transformer vendors on board, the original meter makers on board, the original chassis vendors on board. And except in cases where there had to be a change because modern international safety requirements dictated it, for example, speaker terminals in Europe, you can't have direct access to a speaker terminal in amp more than about 30 or 35 watts. Except for those kinds of changes, they were replicas of the 1960 products.
Yeah.
And I lost a lot of money the first 2 years doing it.
All right, Dan.
Experience is what you get when you don't get what you wanted.
Yeah. Dan, same question to you. What were you doing when you were on the verge of starting your own company, and what made you think you could buy or build and create audio products that people would buy?
Well, I guess I have to say I was working for Ira Gale. Do you remember the Gale loudspeaker?
Yes.
And I had met him. I was in Webster, New York by Xerox, and I was at an audio store, and he'd walked in, and I was asking the owner there about how something worked. I forgot what it was, an amplifier, preamplifier. And he was listening to me talk, and he says, you sound like an engineer. And I said, yeah, I am. And he goes, I'm looking for an engineer. So proceeds to say, why don't you go out to lunch with me? I don't really know who Ira Gale is. And he's got this really frizzy hair and kind of a weird demeanor about him, and took me out to lunch and got me thrown out of a steakhouse in Rochester, New York, by insisting that his steak be rare, but only cooked for 5 seconds on each side. And he told the waiter, and if that steak isn't cooked for 5 seconds on each side, I'll know it. So I'm going, this is not working, you know? So the waiter comes out, brings his steak, Ira cuts it, puts it on his fork, and proceeds to walk into the kitchen of the restaurant. I mean, it's like a cartoon. The chef comes out with a big butcher knife, chasing him out of and he's running out, and he runs out of the restaurant, and the chef turns around with me, are you with him? He said, you get out too. So anyhow, he had this project. He made these eclectic speakers. They had chrome end caps and a stand. They're really quite elegant. It was a little 3-way bookshelf. It sounded very good, except when the metal caps rattled. But that aside, they were very good speakers for the time. He had hired a couple audio engineers, which I think John Krell was one of them, and somebody else, to build him a 200-watt amplifier for him that he wanted to sell with his speakers. And clearly, me being really new to working in the audio field, I had no idea. I'd worked in the audio field, but only as an engineer consultant, but I never really worked for one of the luminaries in audio who he was at the time. And I had no idea what I was getting myself into, because the reason why the other 2 engineers didn't finish the work, because he was an impossible person to work for. But anyhow, I took on the project. I built the amplifier for him. I got it to work. It's a 200-watt per stereo amplifier. Because he was an art guy, so he had the case already made for me. You know, too bad. But it was all in black chrome, like real black chrome, all polished, and it had a heatsink on the back. I mean, at the time, kind of elegant looking. And I tried to put all this stuff in the box, and I got it working, and he says, put it in, you know, carton and fly over to the UK. He sent me funds. I went over with that. He listened to it. He said, it's great. I love it. He said, I want you to go back to New York, and I want you to find a place where we can build these. And we'll go into production, and you be in charge of it. And I said, okay. So I get back, and so I find a place in Long Island City, and I call him, and he said, I don't want to make it. I gave it to my friend. This is how I got started. So I mean, I've got my idea that you can make a really cool looking amplifier and something special. So I decided to do some real research on what was selling, what was like lore. Audio was such a big thing, the lore part of audio. And I found Mark Levinson Audio over at Lyric Hi-Fi because I was living in New York City. So I went, and I went over and listened, and I asked Mr. Mike Kay, who's a wonderful gentleman, what the best amplifier is in store. And he shows me this Mark Levinson, I guess number 25, 25 watts, pure Class A. And I said, wow. So I went over and touched it, and you know, the center part burnt my fingers, and the other 2 parts were running a little cooler. So I started thinking about it. What is going on here? Why is one of the 3 heat sinks on the side really hot and the other 2 So I asked him, he says, well, the center one's the regulator. And I'm going, oh. So I said, so this is the biggest Class A amplifier out there? He said, yeah, it's the biggest one. So I started thinking, I said, 25 watts, you know, you can play a pair of clip shorts pretty loud. But in those days, you know, when a really good loudspeaker was 84 dBs for 1 watt in, 25 watts really wasn't really going to buy you anything. So I said, you need a 100 watt Class A amplifier. So I went to my little apartment in 1979 and started thinking about how I would design a 100 watt Class A amplifier. So I did, in fact, get a 100 watt Class A amplifier working with fans. And I brought it to a reviewer, Peter Excel from Audio Critic, who was very popular in those days. And I had it in this kind of cobbled up metal box that I put together with a drill press. And brought it in, and he listened to it, and he goes, wow, that is an absolutely amazing sounding thing. And so I said, yeah. He said, what is it? I said, it's a pure Class A amplifier. He goes, really? He said, I have another pure Class A amplifier over here. And I said, really? And he showed me, and it was a Bedini. He said, that's pure Class A. I said, really? And I'm touching my heat sinks, and I'm burning my hand, you know, because I hadn't figured out the thermal construction of the amplifier yet. And I'm touching the Bedini, which is 200 watts pure Class A, and it was cold. So I'm saying, Peter, that's not true, you know. So he says, well, I'm gonna measure it. I'll show you. So I went out and back to my apartment, brought my current probe in, and saw immediately that it wasn't Class A. He saw it, and then he said, you really have something here. And I said, really? He said, yeah, this is what the audio market needs. So I always listened to an old friend of mine who told me that he used to see a concrete truck driving around the San Francisco area that used to say on the side, find a need and fill it. And that's what I did. That's how Krell got started. I met my, by then to be wife, Rondi, who used to work for Mitchell Cotter. And together we decided that she could sell this product, that I could build it. And we brought 3 units to the CES show in 1980 in January that were pretty much what a KSA 100 was. And put on, I don't know, probably 20 dealers, distributors mixed. And we had about 50 amplifiers when we got back to New York, and neither one of us could figure out where we were going to build them. So we moved up to Connecticut, found a place, and got started. It was a big difference than building 3 in a little building. Big difference. So I say, you know, when you start a company up, that's a very good thing, is to find a place in the market where you think that company is supposed to be, what you want to do, and that somebody actually needs that. So I think that worked out really well for me, because everybody wanted a 100 watt Class A amplifier in 1980.
Thanks, Dan. Dave, I think I spilled the beans talking about your background as a recording engineer, but what else were you doing when you were on the verge of starting your company?
Well, the first product that Wilson Audio produced actually was a turntable, not a loudspeaker. I built my first loudspeaker in 1960. It wasn't very good, but I had become intrigued with hi-fi and loudspeakers and started reading everything I could find on it. And my favorite book was one of a series of books written by Gilbert A. Briggs of Wharfedale Wireless Works. Now, these were written back in the 50s, and he was a master teacher. He would illustrate with simple drawings and graphs and so forth. And he was a good writer. And so they were very educational. And I had a knack for science in high school, and so it was fun to learn those things. And he would talk about the importance of enclosure resonance control. And there was a illustration of a corner speaker with a 15-inch woofer that was made out of concrete cinder blocks. I would think the wife acceptance factor would be rather poor on that one, gentlemen. And in the 60s also, he brought out a speaker commercially in the United States, which was successful, called the Wharfedale W60. It was a rather elegant-looking bookshelf speaker, and it had a sand-filled baffle. Through the 60s, I experimented with different loudspeaker designs. One of them, I thought, well, resonance control, rubber. So it was a stack of tires with a baffle on the top of it and an Electro Voice 12-inch speaker. I called it the Goodyear Special. Another one, to experiment with true infinite baffles, I made a plywood baffle, put a driver in it, and mounted it in my bedroom window. So the neighborhood became the enclosure. They were not amused. I also, in 1964, became aware of Arthur A. Jansen. Had the pleasure of meeting David Jansen, his son, this afternoon, and we talked old times, well, me old times, he, his father's old times. So I acquired a couple of Jansen electrostatic panels. I worked building Dynakits for a wonderful high-end audio shop in Sacramento, California, the proprietor of whom was Darrell Handel. Darrell Handel had a doctorate from the Eastman School of Music, and we hit it off famously. And so I would build these Dynakits that he would sell to his customers. And he was also an Ortophon, Macintosh, and Bozak dealer. And I developed a fondness, well, for the Ortophon cartridges and for the Bozak loudspeakers. So 1964, 1965 finds me acquiring Bozak drivers and building the first system that I thought was really pretty good, two 12-inch Bozaks, ported enclosure, open baffle, 6-inch Bozak mid-range speaker, one Bozak cone tweeter, and an electrostatic panel. I found that if I moved that upper baffle back and forth, I preferred it in some positions rather than others. It took me a while to figure out the implications of that. But that was the speaker that I had when I first met Cheryl Lee Jameson, who was to become my future wife. And we've been married 50 years now. By the time the 70s came around, we, Cheryl Lee and I, were living in Waukegan, Illinois, the birthplace of Jack Benny, the bowling capital of the Midwest, and the birthplace of Wilson Audio, in a 20-foot by 20-foot garage in a duplex on 10th East. I would go into a number of stores at the time. I was doing clinical research for Abbott Laboratories, so I was doing a lot of traveling. I would design medical clinical studies to test the safety and efficacy of antibiotics. So I would travel around a lot. And I also frequented two hi-fi stores, Audio Consultants, Simon Zarekny, Evanston, Illinois, and a store in the North Shore area, 8 East Huron Street, Erie. Okay, I knew it was one of the lesser of the Great Lakes. And a young salesman there was named Peter McGrath, who was sitting in the front row. I bought a preamp from him, which later became a microphone preamp after I voided the warranty on it by modifying it. He has never forgiven me for that. And so the first product, and I wasn't thinking of it as a product. It was just something I was curious about. I had a turntable which was very beautiful and sounded absolutely dreadful. It was called a transcriptors. And it had a tone arm on it, which, to reduce friction, had mercury contacts on that. Let your kid play with that. And it had a Decca cartridge in it, also acquired from 8 East Erie Street. And so this turntable started life as an AR turntable, which some of you may recall was a passable turntable with a dreadful tone arm, and very popular. So I modified it by machining an interface that would accept an SME Series 2 tone arm. We called it the Smart. They were built in my 20-foot by 20-foot garage, and I delivered the first one in March of 1974. We declared it on our income tax return, and therein started Wilson Audio.
Great, thank you, Dave. Next question is, what was the most significant event in the growth of your company, or what was the most significant product for you as you were developing your company? Frank, you want to start?
Well, that's pretty obvious. And that's pretty obvious. That would have been the Double 400. That starting with the Dyna 400 and doubling the output devices, finding some errors in circuit topography that Dynaco had done in the bootstrap slave circuit and fixing that so that the slave circuits didn't turn off at half power, and then adding a huge power supply to it externally turned what was a pretty good amp into a stunningly good amp, and Harry Pearson reviewed it and pretty much said the best mid-range he'd ever heard in a solid-state amp at that time, and that just generated huge sales for us and gave me the capital then to hire a really good engineer, and instead of what my limited abilities, and continued to just develop high value but rationally priced products ever since. And so that was the most significant early thing that really helped us out.
Kevin, I'm going to ask you a different question because you've kind of already answered the one I just asked. And that is, and this is a tough one, because if you've ever been a parent, when somebody says, who's your favorite child? It's really a tough one to answer. But I suspect that all of these wonderful designers have a number of babies or children in their portfolio. And Kevin, what's product are you most proud of, or what's your favorite of those that you've designed?
Well, I'm going to give you three data points and then give you the final answer.
Okay.
The original PA45, PA90 is always going to be special to me for the reasons of the collaborative design to it and the fact that we were able to start a company based upon them and that they were a decent contribution to the art at the time. Secondly, the Renaissance series of products that came along in 93, 94 were, I think, a real jump ahead for us in the marketplace. They got a tremendous recognition from Harry Pearson and Frank Doris back at the time, and to this day, people are looking for them. We built a great many of them over a period of 15 years or so, and they're still very winsome sounding amplifiers when you encounter them. The thing that we've done most that I look at and am just amazed that we've had the privilege of building is the statement phonostage. If I let my ego run and think that the average is here and we're there on most of our products, the statement phonostage is somewhere out there. It is just the most amazing thing I have ever heard, let alone had the privilege of being part of designing and building.
I'm surprised you didn't mention the IQ circuit.
It's delightful, but you asked the single thing that I'm
Right, okay, you're right. That's the continuous bias circuit that's patented, that Kevin.
Actually, it's able to see through the music continuously to what the true underlying idle point of the tube is and hold that steady within a variation of less than 1%. Brings out a lot more detail, life, nuance, and takes away all the fear factor of having tubes. So we're very, very pleased by that, don't get me wrong, and it's a great improvement. But the single most astounding thing to me that we do is the statement phono stage and the new derivative Renaissance phono stage, which at 1/8 the price, you can still hear the DNA of the statement in.
Thanks. Dan, you've got a couple of different companies to choose from. You know, what was your favorite product you designed, or what's the one that you're most proud of?
The one I'm most proud of is the Momentum Amplifier. I put 30 years at Krell making big, heavy Class A amplifiers. And I wanted to make something when I started again, which of course wasn't my choice. But when I started again, I wanted to make something different. I wanted to look back at the history of all the things that I have designed and thought about, and I wanted to make something that was uniquely different sonically than anything I had done in the past, and uniquely different in industrial design. And I'd always wanted to use copper, and the genesis of the look of this product was partially the copper, and then partially because I wanted to make something in a relatively smaller structure than I had worked with in the past, but really put all of the knowledge that I had and the things that I had learned over the years that sounded good into one product. And my passion to make it the best product I ever did was really driving me. I mean, I worked day and night on it, on the industrial design, and taught myself how to do drawing programs and CAD programs and you name it. And I designed the case of the Momentum, and I wanted the dimensions to be a certain dimension. There's a ratio. A lot of people call them God's numbers, but there's a ratio of height to width to depth, and that ratio is what the Momentum actually is. And I tried to hold true to that. I mean, it's not exactly, I mean, if we're talking about fractions, that's fractions of differences, but it's almost right on the money mathematically as a model. And then I decided how was I going to put a highly powerful, potent 300-watt amplifier that would drive any speaker into this little enclosure. And when I discovered how the copper actually worked, everybody knows it absorbs heat quicker, 91% faster than aluminum. Cool. But how do you use that? What do you use it? What do you do with it? That was the learning curve that I had to deal with. And then once I figured out how to use the copper, then I was able to make that amplifier, and I used circuitry that I have never used before. And I used it I used circuitry in a way I had never used before. So when I finished that product, that was probably one of the most satisfying things that I've done in my whole audio career.
And as I said before, it's gorgeous. Have you considered submitting it to the Museum of Modern Art Design Collection?
My wife never gives me anyone to play with. I never have one. She sells them all. I bring them home. She takes them. I come home to listen. There's no amplifiers in the house. So I never have one, but maybe someday.
Okay. Dave, same question for you.
Well, I would certainly have to say that it's the Watt and Watt Puppy series, the Watt was something that Cheryl had asked me for literally years. Dave, you know, we have two products in 1983. Two products, the Wham, the most expensive loudspeaker, and LP records, right after the introduction of the CD. So where's our income, hubby? And me, looking at it as a recording engineer, it's like, do you mean design something for business reasons? And so we went to, we did a recording session. There's quite a story about it. I won't take the time right now, but it's fascinating. And recorded some harpsichord music in a friend's personal cathedral. Of quite a story there.
Well,
After riding in one of his 200 personal tanks, World War II and World War I, and post-World War II. And we brought the master tapes home. They were awful. I'd been using some British mini monitors for reference on the recording site, and they did not speak the same language in the time domain that the WAM spoke. So he gave the master tapes to the musician, didn't charge her anything for doing the recording or anything like that. I mean, she thought they sounded fabulous. They were ultra master tapes. And we went on a little vacation down to Mexico for 1 week, and I decided I've got to do this. And on the flight back, on a airline napkin, I sketched out the first wad. And that was in August 1984 and 85. And 3 months later, I had the first 2 prototype pairs, which we showed at the Sahara Hotel in Las Vegas. And everybody loved them. I still didn't think about selling them. And then after taking them to Europe to do recording sessions in March of that year, I saw the writing on the wall, and so we launched them in Chicago CES. And so I love them. Thousands of people love them, and I'd have to say that's my favorite.
I have one last question before I open it up to the audience for questions, and that is, as your companies have grown, how has your role changed in that evolution? Frank, is it the same or?
Oh, I've got broader support than I did. I've got more engineering help than I did. I've got, my people are more experienced than they've been. And I think I'm more open to outside suggestions and advice than I had been. And it's all left us with more capability, more engineering capability, and more ideas for the future.
Great. Kevin, can I ask you the same question?
Let's see. Early on in the first year or so, the move from being design contributor to being the designer of the equipment, much as Dan was saying a moment ago, learning all the various CAD packages, I now do the industrial design, the chassis designs, and so forth for the company. As Frank said, actually didn't say this directly, but I'll add to it. One of the best things that ever happened to me was, getting a little crushed by life and learning I'm not the smartest person in the room necessarily, and becoming more open to other contributing ideas, watching the horizon a bit better. That's one of the things we actually do at the company regularly over the last 20 years or so, is deliberately once or twice a year engaging in an R&D program which is outside of our normal theories and materials, to make sure we haven't overlooked something, to make sure we haven't believed our own press too much. So the technology has given us more of a chance to have more control and influence on the designs, but developing a good team and developing increased capabilities.
Great. Dan?
Well, I have to say, when I started Krell, I did everything. And 30 years later, I'm still doing everything. Nothing changed.
Must be a good formula. Dave?
It's been a little that way with me too, but I've been very fortunate to have, over the decades, been able to engage very talented people, wonderful people, to become part of the Wilson Audio family. We have about 50 full-time employees at Wilson Audio, and the average tenure there is about 14 years. So that's been satisfying. I think it's very important that if the initial value and the concept and the vision of the company is correct, that you preserve that. If people resonate with that and they love it, then do everything you can to sustain the strength there and to respect your customer. You've got to always remember who your customer is and respect them. So, you know, I'm very close to turning the reins over to my son, Daryl. And, you know, he and I have worked together for many years. Even when he was a little child, he was my listening buddy. And, you know, he embraces those values and he's trained himself appropriately for it. So that's pretty much how it's changed.
Great, great. Well, we have a few minutes to open up questions to the audience. I don't know if we have microphones for you to ask them, but if we don't, if you could just kind of speak up and go, have at it. What do you see in the future for high-end audio is the question. I'll open it to the panel.
Well, hopefully getting nearer and nearer to a better and more faithful, more vivid, more lifelike reproduction. There's the old saying that if you're only tool you have is a hammer, every problem looks like a nail. So I think of amplifiers initially when you asked the question. And we are in a mature technology which continues to have a gradual growth, sometimes more of a spurt than others, but a general improvement over time. And I don't see any reason that will discontinue. Looking at the history of technology and innovation, that should continue, barring some new development of water-powered amplifiers or something. It should just keep getting better and better. Speakers, of course, you'd be the right person for that. The real wild card to me is going to be source material. That world is so chaotic to me right now, the way I assess it. I have no idea where that's going to go. From my business model, of course, the important thing is as long as a good sound source is available, no matter what it is, I'll amplify it well. So it doesn't really worry me, but it's interesting.
Mm-hmm.
I could, I could rate.
Go for it.
Years ago, high-end audio was doomed by the introduction of Japanese receivers, and then they were doomed, high-end audio, as far as the receiver business was kind of doomed by the introduction of surround sound. Actually, it was quadraphonic sound way back then, which was going to doom high-end audio until, but it didn't. And then surround sound, home theater was going to doom audio, and it didn't. And although it made it annoying because all the majors quit doing two-channel stereo, and we have to admit that that was a really great advertising for us, because all the major two-channel manufacturers could say you need stereo in your home, and we could ride on their coattails by saying, yeah, but we can do it a lot better. And so we didn't have to do the selling job ourselves. But then stereophonic 4-channel was going to doom us, and it didn't. We're going back, and then gee whiz, CDs are going to doom all the people who love to do records and turntables, and they didn't. And now little itty bitty things that are made, that are imported with little earbuds, are going to doom high-end audio, and I don't think that is either. As long as we can have good source material and we can amplify it well, and we can make your home into a place of, for the love of music. I don't think we're doomed.
Well, I have to say one thing. Look around the room. There's no young people in this room. We need to get young people into this hobby, or there isn't going to be any high-end audio. Because, you know, we all have a life expectancy, and we're all in, you know, I mean, I shouldn't say all of us, but the people here at this table are all in their 60s and 70s. You're younger. But still, you know, we need to bring young people into this business, or I see a very dim future.
I think that the core foundation of it is the importance of music to humanity. And music can be a virtually universal language, but it has almost infinite dialects. Music is a complex code. And so if you can create equipment that properly reproduces that code to the individual so it touches them emotionally, that's a first step. That's the concept. I think high-end audio embraces that concept and exemplifies it at the highest level, and then the second part is the execution of that concept. And high-end audio needs to execute that concept at the highest possible level, so that if it's a machine that you're building like a turntable or something like that, the human-machine interface has to be as satisfying as possible. I think one reason why young people are drawn to vinyl now is because there's a human-machine interface. It's not like something that's blah, 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 you know, on their devices. There's very little human interface there other than touching the screen. But it's intriguing to look at this mechanical thing that tells a story. And I think that's one thing that we need to remember.
Great. We had another question over here. Anybody else?
Well, this was a question I could ask you, because after all, this is our second. The four of you up there are certainly no-nonsense traditional engineers. Those of us who write about high-end audio have a certain kind of nonsense. It's when the high-end audio ethos goes to magazines, you know, the traditional expression about all this poetry, about all this soft and fuzzy stuff.
Well, there still is a lot of soft, fuzzy stuff. And I think that as part of this concept and execution, in order to have, you know, you look at the concept of say, a loudspeaker. It is unbelievable. If you look through patents, the crazy ideas that get patented. And every once in a while, there's a gem there. So the concept has to be valid, and then the execution has to be correct. So the concept and execution require not only passion, but discipline. Passion gets people into a lot of trouble sometimes. But discipline can be boring, but it usually buffers people from disaster. So I think that, but you know, Gordon Holt got it right from the beginning, that it's all about how does it sound? Does it sound like real music? And, you know, unlike Gladden, you know, the Hirschhawk, you know, tests in, in Hi-Fi Stereo Review and so forth, where if it measures good, it's perfect, you know. So I think that, you know, I was attracted to it.
So how many of you guys remember when the Absolute Sound started? And you got these little yellow pamphlets, and you handed them out and you read some excerpts that Harry wrote and what he was going to write about. I thought that was really cool because there was nothing out there like that. I mean, even the Stereophile was a great start. but Harry put a whole new spin and take on it that kind of mystified it and turned it into something that you might, pick up the little book and read it, which was the whole idea. And read the reviews and see how somebody that really likes music and has passion for the equipment will write about it, which we never had in the business, really. I mean, you had the audios and the stereo reviews and those kind of books. There is no passion in those books. And when Harry wrote with that on that little yellow thing that you're going to sign up for and get a subscription, that was really cool. I thought it was great.
In the mid-'80s, when I first became aware of stereophile and the absolute sound, I thought they were just one of the greatest things ever. And especially in the absolute sound, the feature articles on recording Reiner, for example, or collectability of older equipment. I think was it who was the fellow that used to do the used equipment? Bender, Wes Bender? No.
The what now?
Fellow used to do vintage audio equipment out of the East Coast, and he wrote a series of articles for the absolute sound and collectability of Scott receivers.
There was
Alstine.
Mark Sparks.
No, someone else.
Sid Marks.
I've forgotten the name, so I apologize for that. But all these wonderful articles, not just about this new piece of equipment, but about the history of recording and music and the lineage and progression of the engineering, the componentry, and the sort of language of review that Harry Pearson brought to it. It was longer than an audio review, for example, but it was never without a point. Much as music is a way of communicating emotion, those forms of reviews were about communicating meaningful attributes of the equipment in ways that really hadn't been done that I was aware of previously. So to that degree, I thought it was just the most wonderful thing, and I wouldn't miss it for a large number of years.
Great.
And finally, I could say that when we were designing some new things in the recent years, I found that I was getting frustrated at not being able to properly verbally discuss what I was hearing about what we were doing as well as I'd like. And so one of my engineers suggested that and he actually built for us a double-blind ABX comparator, which works beautifully, which allows us to compare an old circuit with a new circuit and take all of the verbiage out and which one do you like better, and take a test and run it and you get the result. And that helps us. But trying to describe what we're doing is awful boring. And so we need you guys.
Yeah. One last one quickly.
Yeah, thank you. When you were first starting your businesses, what was your biggest business adversity, and how did you overcome the technicals of the inventions or designs of this? Starting the business, kicking it off, getting it going.
Money. Period.
And how did we overcome it?
Money is hard to overcome. But when you start a business, you often find yourself eating Doritos for dinner.
Yeah.
And you have to put in the self-sacrifice, or the money factor will kill you every time.
Mine started as a hobby, and I had a day job. And so I just kept the day job and built the hobby. And so our first loudspeaker product was the Wham. That was a pretty ambitious product.
I would say.
And when I did not release that until it was ready. And I think that if I had taken the typical business approach of, hey, I've got an idea, so we put together a business plan and everything, and we go out and we get investors and all that, that puts a tremendous burden on a small company. And I didn't have that burden. And so, by the time I quit my day job, that ours was running. The plane was off the runway and we were flying.
Great.
I have a kind of funny story to tell about. Again, I like the others. I had a day job, and this was a hobby business, and then it actually developed into a real business, but I hadn't quit my day job. I was still a project engineer for the highway department in Minnesota, and we worked in a great big open Dilbert-like thing with pigeonholes all over, and guys around me were buying audio from me and other engineers and that, whichever, and even sometimes my wife would call her, I'd call her and ask questions about a customer. So I was doing a little bit of audio business on state time, which wasn't highly approved, and some of the guys knew I was doing it, and some of them didn't. Some of them thought it was okay, and some of them thought I was a real, I shouldn't be doing it at all, until one day, the department head for the entire right-of-way division comes walking into our office, and from about 10 desks away says, "Van Alstyne, I heard you've been selling a high-end audio equipment around here." And I can hear the giggles from everybody. Boy, is he gonna get it now. He says, "Well, yes, sir." And he says, "Well, my daughter's getting married, and what's the best audio system you can put together for her?"
Well, on that note, I'd like to really thank our panel and you for attending. Each of these legends is profiled in our latest series of books, the Absolute Sound's Illustrated History of High-End Audio. Dan, Kevin, and Frank are in the new electronics book, and Dave and Wilson Audio are in the loudspeaker book. We're going to have a book signing. Unfortunately, it's not right outside this venue. It's outside of the marketplace. And Jonathan Vallon, who he and Robert Harley were our editors for this book, and Julie Mullins, a managing editor. They poured their hearts and souls into this book. If you like this kind of background and insight, I really encourage you to buy this book. Thank you.